Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the 2021 Biomed Device Boston event. We're glad to have you here. I'd like to introduce our next panel. They're going to be talking about my CMDO has been acquired. Now what? We've got some experts here who are going to walk you through some of the most important issues around this. And I'm going to start you off with an introduction to Dave Dykman, who is going to be the panel moderator. He's with Greenberg Traurig and has a lot of experience in the industry. So if you would please help me welcome Dave and our panelists.
All right, thank you, Lori. It's great to be here. It's great to be at an in-person conference and see some faces, or at least see some familiar masks, some familiar eyeballs. But we've got a great panel today, a lot of medtech industry experience to talk about what's going on in contract development and manufacturing organizations. 2020 was a record year for M&A and consolidation in the CDMO industry, and 2021 is on pace to break all those records. There's a large consolidation. There's a lot of smaller operations that are banding together or getting gobbled up, depending on which perspective you're looking at. And a lot of it is driven by private equity dollars, where they're buying the smaller players, putting them together and rolling them up, and creating more efficient and larger organizations that can serve some of the larger medtech functions around. So we have a great panel, and we'll introduce them shortly. But first, we wanted to see who's in the audience. So how many of you work at a CDMO, a contract design or manufacturing organization? Okay. How many of you work at an OEM? Got one in the front row, Peter Stebbins. And how many of you are consulting or involved in this industry in that way? And how many have worked at a large medtech company during their tenure somewhere along the way? So most of the crowd. So that'll set us up for success. And we're gonna, introduce the panelists now, and I'm gonna have them tell us about their expertise and also talk about a trend they're seeing in the contract development and manufacturing organization consolidation. So right to my left, we'll start with Carlos DiMemilio. He's a partner at Alira Health, flew in from San Francisco to talk to us today, so he'll have a great West Coast perspective. So Carlo, introduce yourself a little more and tell us what you're seeing in the industry.
Thank you, Dave. Nice to have you and pleasure to be here. I'm a partner at Alira Health, which is a service provider to the life sciences with a mission to accelerate the development of the medical products and businesses. And we do that through a variety of services that mimic the life cycle of medical technology, from early product development through regulatory and clinical affairs, business strategy, which is really the core business historically, and then a broker-dealer transaction advisory practice, which I represent, where we help entrepreneurs, venture-backed med device companies to generate exits and facilitate partnerships with large strategics. Within this position of privilege as a deal maker, I've been involved for the past decade with the contract manufacturing industry. And it's been a terrific journey, and I've had the pleasure of experiencing firsthand what Dave was describing and this growing trend of industry consolidation. And I've learned something along the way. And I'm happy to be here and sharing my thoughts during the panel. As regarding the trend, obviously, there is such an appetite and hunger for inorganic growth in the CDMO space that it's difficult to pinpoint something really specific. Within the large activity across the supply chain, different type of capabilities around plastics, contract manufacturing, I want to talk about something that has been accelerating in the past 12 to 18 months, which is the focus of established CDMOs to develop or acquire front-end design and development capabilities, engineering to assist customers with the early development of medical devices, to first of all to optimize the cost and the features of the device, but also from a business point of view to establish long-term partnerships with their OEM clients. And that is something that is picking up pace as a driver for M&A as well. So I thought that was something worth mentioning. And with that, I'll pass along to my colleague here.
Yeah, thank you, Carlo. And we'll hear more. Carlo has really done a deep dive with Alira Health of what's going on in the CDMO industry. So he'll set the table and tell us more about that later. And our next panelist is Vincent Wong, who's the Chief Quality Officer at TOMS Corporation, located in Connecticut. So Vincent, tell us a little more about what you're doing at TOMS and a trend you're seeing.
Thank you, Dave. Good afternoon, everyone. Like you said, Vincent Wong, Chief Quality Officer at TOMS Corporation. We are a contract manufacturer primarily focused in the spine and orthopedic space. So we partner with OEMs, large and small, on primarily design transfers, design for manufacturing through commercialization. And prior to TOMS, I've been there about a year now. My entire career has been in med device. Most of it in contract manufacturing. Started off at Covidien, now Medtronic, in their surgical division doing post-market surveillance. Did a short stint doing development of Class 1 and Class 2 diagnostic med devices. And then the largest stint at Surtech Medical doing concept through commercialization of active implantables, focused primarily on neuromodulation. So most of it being in contract manufacturing on the execution and on the operational side. My expertise or my background is primarily in essentially that, going through DHF management with OEMs, walking through napkin sketch all the way through design transfer and sustained manufacturing support, but then also through these contract manufacturers and acquisitions, supporting QMS harmonization and deployment. So multi-site organizations trying to operate and navigate the ISO and FDA requirements while still making it lean and adaptable for OEMs to partner with. That's primarily where a lot of my focus has been in my career, is between servicing customers to best adapt to their needs from an ISO standpoint, but also from their customer requirements, but then establishing a strong quality management system through software and processes to help them execute there. With that, my trend, or what I've been seeing in the last couple of years, is obviously with all the acquisition activity that's been occurring, very quick to acquire, whether it's on the OEM or on the contract manufacturing side. But where I see challenges are the follow-through on execution. So call it acquisition of 5 or 10 or 15 organizations, still operating as X number of different companies. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like, what the challenges are, and ensuring that there is that follow-through on the acquisition side.
Now, thank you, Vincent, and looking forward to hearing from that. And our third and final panelist is Chuck Sieren, who is the VP of Medical Devices and Life Sciences at Propel. Propel is a commercial stage company that has a very unique solution to help the medical device and life science industry. They have the only unified QMS, quality management system, and PLM, product lifecycle management system, together. And they're built on the Salesforce platform, which most companies already have. And Propel had exciting news. They just announced this morning they closed their $20 million Series C round and brought their total money raised now to close to $50 million. So Chuck, tell us about the excitement at Propel.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Chuck Sieren, VP Industry Marketing. MedTech, Life Sciences, a couple years at Propel, very excited. Dave did a great introduction of who Propel is, so that's awesome, a product success platform here. Streamlines your data across the entire product lifecycle, right, from concept to commercialization. So it includes information like your supplier data, your quality data, while also seamlessly connecting to customer and sales information as well. So I've been at Propel a couple years. It's been very exciting. Prior to that, I was at Stryker for 10 years, deploying multiple EQMS and PLM systems there. And prior to that, another 10 years prior to that, I was a consultant in the EQMS and PLM industry as well. And I think one of the questions was, we're going to talk a lot about some of the trends and some of the things that we're seeing, but I guess one trend that pops up lately is sort of a portal, having an on-platform portal capability so that you can extend your platform across to your partners, to your suppliers, to your notified bodies that have access to tech files, or maybe to meet regulations like IFU. So this partner portal is just something that really has been trending a lot lately in my world, if you ask for one. Thanks.
So that's our panel, and we thought we'd kind of get a good baseline for everybody. And as I mentioned, Carlo and Alira Health did a report that kind of examined this consolidation in the CDMO industry. So why don't we turn it over to Carlo? Why don't you tell us, what's really going on in the CDMO consolidation over the last couple of years and what's driving it?
Yeah, consolidation is happening, has been happening for a good part of the last decade, and will continue to happen in the foreseeable future. And that all starts with the OEM side, strong preference of medical device companies to simplify their cost structure and run more efficient, more profitable business. And when it comes to outsourcing operations or part of the supply chain, that translates into moving to a variable cost structure, reducing cost of capital overall. And that's a strategy that, with the consolidation trend that is happening at the OEM level, with the big mergers and acquisition among large medical device companies, Medtronic, Covidien was sort of started this process several years ago. It became paramount for these medtech giants to become leaner and more efficient. And that has created a huge demand for outsourcing services that has trickled down to feed the growth of multiple CDMOs of different size, scale, and capabilities. That has prompted in this space a motivation to become to grow faster, to become more consolidated and vertically integrated, to be able to win more business in this quest for this volume of outsourcing that were coming from the clientele and the big guys. The accelerator of this process, as Dave pointed, has been the entry in the space of private equity investors who have seen an opportunity to act as an aggregator of organization of small and mid-size, and create larger platform with a more established footprint, greater quality, and high volume, high capacity, high throughput capabilities. And that has created a rush of corporate and financial investors to get first to acquire targets. And that's a process that is still very much in flux. The M&A market is super active. As you pointed, Dave, it's probably 2021 is going to be a record year with many assets on the market and a huge appetite that has pushed up valuation and expectation of entrepreneurs also for large exits, which is sort of creating a self-fulfilling circle where it's a seller's market, and it's perpetuating this trend of continuous M&A consolidation, which is prompted, to going back to the beginning of my comment, to very strategic objectives by OEMs, which is focusing less on making the product, sometimes even on developing new technology inside and farming it out, and just focusing on their core mission, which is distributing technology to patients and prompting innovation and addressing clinical needs.
And Chuck, why don't you give us a little different take on it?
Okay. Yeah, I can add a little perspective, maybe add on to that. Definitely from my perspective, we're seeing a much greater rate of CDMOs that we're working with, and seeing the increased rate of them. Also, their size much smaller, as well as much more highly specialized. We're seeing a lot of people from the industry, executives, engineers, quality folks, driving into the CDMO industry. I kind of look back like 20 years. In one of my past software companies, worked a lot with the big giant, contract manufacturers and EMSs, and those were our primary customers then. But they were just, mostly dominant big players, and they focused a lot on sourcing components and, pricing and costing. and very little visibility from the OEM perspective on what was being priced, or exactly not collaborating at a high partnership level. And I think there's just been this big evolution that Carlo's really speaking to about how this partnership is forming, how business manufacturing process optimization and quality control and more testing, all of this stuff is starting. The CDMOs are starting to add to their business line, and the OEMs are recognizing, helping out design for manufacturability and doing design much earlier in that NPD process and contributing to that. Even regulatory, right? We're seeing them offer regulatory pathways and helping with those kind of design for regulatory stances as well. So I think those are the things I'm seeing from our customers and software perspective. We're also seeing quite a few of our customers and prospects also being spec developers, specification developers, where they have these great innovative ideas and they see these open mid-market or innovative open market opportunities, and they're offering that to their OEMs. And with the OEMs, commercialization engine, they can leverage that sales and marketing capability out in the field and be able to, form that partnership. And then we're seeing some of our customers actually being, legal manufacturers or device manufacturers themselves. We got one 3D printer company that does nanotechnology 3D printer, and they just have so many great innovative ideas. They're coming up with some of their own products. So I guess I kind of say that, and that's sort of creating that energy and excitement in the CDMO industry. And we're seeing so many more the last year or two, coming to us to look for systems to help them. And then I think that's spawning, as you mentioned, the PE investment, the OEM investment, or other CMs just looking to expand global footprint or their product lines.
And Vincent, as a manufacturer company involved in the thick of this, what's your perspective?
So as the market evolves, we've also seen ISO evolve. We've also seen the expectations around the FDA regulations evolve. In the last couple of years, they've actually started to converge on each other. So you see 9001 branch off, but in med device space, hate to put it in a different way, but they're tightening the noose on regulations and what it takes to ultimately launch product to the field. And when you look at that from a CDMO perspective, there is unfortunately cost associated with everything. So when you're looking at that, it's gone with the build to print suppliers, the one-stop shops that you can build these partnerships with. It's now looking, like Carlo was saying, that vertical integration. You want to go to that one organization that you can partner with, because switching between suppliers is very costly, and the regulatory submission and the cost behind that requires a vast amount of resources on the OEM side. So if you're looking at it from a CDMO perspective, you want to take your expertise, your existing portion of the supply chain, and vertically integrate in that perspective. Go backwards, go forwards, look at your engineering services that you're providing, look at your manufacturing capabilities that you're providing, and find something that complements it. So then you start looking at those acquisitions, because those experts are out there, that you can start appending those to your existing manufacturing capabilities. And when you look at the value that you can drive from a supplier perspective, you then translate that into, okay, so say in Tom's perspective, we're primarily in spine. So we can expand on our existing portfolio because we've now brought in the additional capabilities that otherwise our OEMs are otherwise going elsewhere for. So driving that value back into the product, reducing cost and lead time for those customers, and then all of these OEMs, as they continue to consolidate as well, have a number of different business units. I've been in surgical, I've been in diagnostic, I've been in cardio rhythm management as well, and in neuromodulation. So with these OEMs, if you start integrating and creating that vertical integration, you start partnering with those existing customers and expanding the portfolio that way. You actually are making yourself a better partner for those other business units. And you really start to turn the contract manufacturing really into a manufacturing extension, an engineering extension of these OEMs. And that's where a lot of that evolution is occurring.
So that's a great backdrop for what's going on in the industry from the perspective of deal makers, perspective of people who are servicing those deals, and from people who are in the thick of the manufacturing arena every day. And now let's look at what happens, how is this consolidation impacting the operations of OEMs and other businesses in this industry? And why don't we start from the person who's in the middle of it? Vincent, why don't you start with that for us?
All right, so we started to touch upon that from the OEM perspective, with a number of manufacturers, and they continue to grow and innovate and evolve capabilities that are out there now. Again, with regulations changing, it's costly. So how do we, as an OEM, mitigate supply chain risk by consolidating our ASL? Breaking it down so we have those key critical suppliers that we can partner with. 5 suppliers versus 100 can be very appealing. So you look at that, and that's where that consolidation will start to occur or start to mirror with the strategy that the CDMOs are taking. They start to look at how they take their existing processes and software and look at unifying and harmonizing across the organization what they're looking for. And you look at that ASL consolidation, that one-stop shop, they're looking at not just from the manufacturing capability standpoint, but DHF management as well. We kind of have an underlying theme of cost in there, and that's where engineering resources, the brains behind these activities, can also be an impending cost to organizations as well. So taking that from the beginning, find a partner that not only can just manufacture, but bring it back to being a partner on the DHF side and pulling that through to manufacturing, is where you're starting to see more than just consolidation of capabilities. It's consolidation of resources. It's consolidation of processes that make us efficient, and ultimately that'll benefit the customer as well as the patient themselves.
And Karwa, what's your take on how does it impact the OEMs?
Yeah, well, Vincent talked about consolidation of supply chain, so I don't really know what to say. No, I'm joking. I will bring it one level further and say that this simplification of the supply chain involves not only the number of suppliers, but is introducing some types of risk-adjusted metrics to measure the sustainability of the supply chain itself. Not to to mention COVID as a reason for these trend or revolution, but there was certainly a time earlier in the pandemic where there was a fear that supply chains globally would be affected by the lack of flux of products from offshore locations, for example. Let's not forget that, especially for lower value components, suppliers and CDMOs based in China and other Asia-Pac countries represent significant amount of volumes. And so that spurred a dialogue strategically on how to minimize risk of disruption in the supply chain. And we're seeing in the market some decision and some action towards onshoring of select components of the supply chain to diminish that risk and measure first and second suppliers based on these risk-adjusted metrics. And at the end of the day, this is reflecting on an evolution of the relationship between OEMs and outsourcing partners to create incentives related to quality and sustainability of the supplies to try to prevent and to set up processes that prevent disruption. And eventually that I believe is going to be one of the strategic factors that will continue to drive interest in outsourcing parts of internal operations that are still held close to the chest of OEMs, but that little by little with these high-level partnership are going to be farmed out more and more, and so ultimately prompting continuous growth in the CDMO space.
And Chuck, do you have any thought about the impact of OEMs?
I could add another perspective. I didn't know exactly what you guys are going to say, but maybe looking at it from, since the abstract talks about pandemic recovery, I could take that stab. And, we're seeing definitely a shortage in supply chain, shipping, storage, right? We're seeing it automotive with chips, medical device, PPE, oxygenation systems. You can go down the list. There's just been these shortages. And I think that the CDMOs give this great perspective on how can we design for that availability? How can we adjust? How can we have, not just single sources? I know in my past med dev companies is highly single source. And you always want to look at more alternate sources or dual sources so you can, reduce those high-risk components or subsystems that you're looking at. So I think that's one perspective. Another perspective would be that move of what's been globalization for so many years, decades, right, is moving a little bit more towards a nationalism where you want to have your trade sources more close and local to you. I think that spawns upon the advent of, nearshoring versus offshoring, the same language or the same time zones, maybe the same languages, maybe a little more proximity. So I think that's another part of that element. And then I guess one other thought I had, languages, and I guess maybe just foreign companies, like foreign OEMs that want to have a more local presence, might be looking to make acquisitions, to bring it back to the M&A tie, but maybe looking for acquisitions, in the U.S. in that space as well.
And with all these acquisitions going on, there's a dramatic impact inside the company of both the target and the acquirer. And there's a particular impact on IP and technology. So let's turn to our technologist, Chuck from Propel. Tell us what we're seeing for the impact of IP and technology based on the consolidation boom.
Okay, yeah, intellectual property and technology. So I'll probably take it more from the software angle here, but you obviously got to make sure that your data, so there's all different types of IP, but you want to make sure that it's very secure, that you're able to collaborate with your partners, and that you're positioned well for any instances like, we continue to go back to M&A or divestitures or joint ventures or whatever might happen. So I guess if you think about the different types of IP, at the early stages, you're gathering your, customer marketing requirements, your customer needs, developing the specs and processes and drawings. This is all part of your IP. Even to the point of software, where you want to get those agreements in place very early, so that you know who's developing it, who owns that data. I think these are really important elements that lend even into like your patent strategies, so that you work on your patent portfolios early on, and before you make it available publicly, that you have these agreements and these conditions in place. Those are IP elements that we talk about a lot with our customers, even to the point of trade secrets, building up your DHF, your DMR for design transfer, and having a very good mechanism to transfer that information securely. So I think that leads to a secure platform, something like, as mentioned, the Salesforce platform, most secure in the world, where you can build the apps you're on that are built natively for the cloud. They're built on one platform, ideally. And then having the right document management system, quality management system, QMS, PLM for your product structure and your BOM, so that you can have that information very easy to share, as we talked about, like from a partner portal standpoint, or Part 11 compliance for electronic signature and records. Having that all built into the system is very important. Even your PHI, like your personal health information, so you can manage it from data in transit or data at rest, or de-identify the data and be able to configure it properly so that only the right people can see that data. Those are the things that come to mind. And then I think the level of partnership that you have, OEM to CDMO is important too, as to which systems or subsystems that you want to, have them build, or even to the OEM managing down the supplier level, down to the component level, as you mentioned, ASL. Those are all really important elements that you need to be able to control. We see a lot of OEMs that then want to share that data out. If you have those structures in place, it's very easy to share that data if you have the right tool that has share permissions and built in the cloud and all that. And then we're also seeing the CDMOs coming to us saying, okay, well, we want our own QMS system, our PLM system for product structure, and we want to share that data with our OEMs. I think that's kind of looking at it the other direction, and that's something where I talked about we're seeing a lot of increase in that, where they're putting in these more formal systems. They're recognizing the regulations and standards. And I guess lastly is the collaboration element. You want to be able to collaborate with your CDMOs an OEM, so you can collaborate on your workflows, like your first article inspections, your production part approval process, NCMRs, even to the point of like what you're getting from the patients and customers as far as like complaints or incidences that you want to feed through the system and do a very quick resolution, incident to resolution time to close that, so you can do those cycles with the CDMO to do those fixes. And I think data is gold. You've got patient data, you got to make sure you have the right terms of use, but now that if you can start collecting that patient data, then you can start reporting on it, making decisions. I think that's another important element. And then lastly, I think that having these tools in place, having these systems in place and these technologies makes, again, these CDMOs and that much more desirable and acquirable in the market. So I think that's my perspective.
And Carlo or Vincent, do you have any thoughts on the impact on IP and technology of an acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, it's Chuck brought up some really great points, and I can certainly speak from experience, and I'm going to make a bold statement, but a lot of medical device manufacturing is very antiquated. So paper-based, manual, whether it's quality system processes or manufacturing through DHR retention and management, very paper-based. So if you go to a lot of organizations, it's those manual handoffs. It's when you're looking at the effectiveness and the performance of your manufacturing processes or the effectiveness of your QMS, you're actually requiring individuals or staffing individuals to mine that data to even get some lagging indicator of how you're performing. So back to Chuck's point about using technology, using the current technology to streamline those types of operations that really run your business, incredibly important when not only for organizations or CDMOs to flip from manual to these systems, but then also on the consolidation piece once the acquisitions occur. It's one thing to be automated, to have that data at your fingertips. It's another if you have an organization with 5 different systems that don't talk to each other. So really using a platform, like Salesforce, like Propel and other PLM systems that allow you to intertwine quality processes with dock control management, with manufacturing effectiveness, and having that information at your fingertips is incredibly powerful, because a lot of med device organizations are still, they got the back room where they have individuals actually, pulling that data out from their charts and monitoring logs. So very important in finding that organization that's starting to invest and innovate in that space is probably going to be a strong partner for you.
I agree, and I think that this aspect of integration between OEM and CDMO on the IP generation is a necessity, as delivering innovation to the market is becoming more and more difficult and more competitive, and OEMs, whether they are large multinational companies or funded startups, they don't own all the capabilities, all the competencies to develop all aspects of their products, and they have to rely on experts that can do that efficiently at a lower cost to accelerate time to market. Going back to my earlier comment regarding the importance for CDMOs to own product design and engineering capabilities, that's really the key. I think the model that based on which OEMs develop the entire technology in-house is over, and the importance of having trusted suppliers that can innovate and deliver human form factor analysis, user interface, data connectivity, areas that are not really part of the common competencies of traditional medtech players, is going to deliver a lot of value to the industry. Now, who owns the innovation is a different aspect. Whether that is owned by the customer based on contract, or generated by the outsourcing partner and then license back to the customer is also something that is trending and that we see more often. There's definitely more often than a decade ago, where there was a clear separation of who owned the rights to the technology, to pieces of the innovation, whether it's in the design for manufacturability or in the concept of the device itself. You, Dave, are definitely more competent than me on this subject, and but yeah, this is a transition towards new models that I think is going to be very exciting to look at in the next few years.
And I think the panelists did a great job of hitting on the key points. But as an IP lawyer who's done a lot of due diligence on these type of acquisitions for the acquirer, oftentimes a private equity shop, we can tell you the key is in the agreements and what are the key clauses in those agreements, and making sure if you have software that you have the ownership of that software locked up and it wasn't developed by some third party who's lost in the wind 5-6 years later, or more and more developed in Eastern Europe where it's difficult to track down the coders. So the key is these acquisitions take time. You see the headlines, little do you know that the first contact was probably 12 months or more before the headline happened. And at that time, the diligence, getting all these I's dotted and T's crossed and getting your agreements in place and making sure you own the innovations, don't license them back, or worse, are silent and it's not clear who owns them. Because if you have to get the document signed at the 11th hour, the other party knows that they have leverage, and oftentimes they try to extract a premium. If you developed a code for a few $1,000s 10 years ago, and now all of a sudden you see the company's worth a lot of money, you know they're coming to you because they really need that document. And you can say, sure, I'm willing to sign that, but now I want a payment just to sign it. And oftentimes companies are left with nothing to do but to pay that payment, because otherwise the deal's not going to happen, or it's going to happen for a lower valuation. So I think that's it. But let's look in, let's talk about the acquisitions. What do you wish an OEM would know now, and what could they do now to help them be acquired for a premium down the road? Carlo, you want to start with that one?
What's the second part of your question again?
What could an OEM customer, what do you wish they knew now as they're looking forward to the future?
Well, in the past year and a half, or a good part of it, OEMs wanted to know when are procedures, non-elective procedure, going back to the clinic. There has been a dramatic cliff in many types of procedures, surgical procedures particularly, that have had important negative economic impact on many of these categories of products. So, improving your ability to predict performance, I think that's key, and the trickle-down effect on the supply chain is being able to plan your supply chain better and reduce your cost and mitigate risks. So obviously, that has been put to test during the pandemic. And I believe as the consolidation and the migration towards an outsourcing model continues, there will also benefit for this continuum, and so that our industry can become more efficient and more integrated and more safe.
And Vincent, as a manufacturing company, what do you wish some of the OEMs would know now?
Sure. So we talked about quite a bit of evolution that's occurred in the market, in innovation and technology, as well as the regulations. And right now, from a CDMO perspective, it's an aggressive market out there. It's selling yourselves as the right partner for the OEM. And I think what would be really critical for OEMs to know is that partnership is not transactional like it used to be. It's not just place an order, make a part. It truly is, and we've said it, I think, a couple times now, that partnership. So the approach and the evaluation of choosing that partner or that extension, it needs to evolve and be more complex. So it's not just about manufacturing capability and piece part price. It's their leadership. Do they have the right leadership in place to ensure they're going to innovate, they're going to invest in their staff, they're going to have longevity, in that partnership, but then also breaking it down to back to the trend I was saying. It's not just about the acquisition, it's also the execution. So looking at how they've executed their internal acquisitions, have they harmonized software, have they harmonized processes? Because the last thing you want to do as an OEM is go in and say, I'm working with this organization, but I go through the 5 sites and they all look different. They all operate differently. And that ends up still being just as the same amount of work as, working with 5 independent suppliers on your ASL. So that complexity of evaluation is important. And that really brings us back to a lot of the other themes we've said. It's QMS processes, it's the software systems, using that, taking advantage of that so that all those day-to-day operational activities that a CDMO has to go through is passed on, and you'll realize it in cost. You'll realize it in time to market because we've taken these processes and streamlined supply chain even between sister sites. I'm not placing a PO to Chuck because he's at the next location. We've used the system to drive internal demand so that we've actually cut down the lead time on how we move material through. So what really got to look at all the many different layers of the evaluation when you're selecting that supplier. Someone that knows the market, someone that knows how to navigate the evolving ISO and FDA requirements, and knows how to facilitate that with the right processes and the right software.
So we have just a couple minutes left, but we did want to make sure we had time for any audience questions. Does anyone have a question for the panel?
So I had a question for everybody, but based on something Carlos said, in terms of the frothiness of the PE mark, you're kind of scaring me a little bit here in terms of if the CDMOs are doing roll-ups and are going to end up being financially unstable because they're having to pay down their debt, is it actually going to be smart for OEMs to go to those types of companies? I worry a little bit when you kind of said it's so much interested PE money coming in. Again, in terms of a partnership, where you talk about a partnership, the notion of a PE firm who, by definition, is going to be out within 10 years, how do you feel like they're going to be a good partner if it's PE owned and they're going to flip it, in that time frame? So I'm just trying to, I understand why PE money's interested in being in the space, but how do you think we should think about managing those risks?
My perspective is that, first of all, before any transaction can be completed on a CDMO, the sign-off of the key customers is required, because that's a big part of the value of the asset you're buying and of the target, and so customers have to buy into the project, knowing well that in a few years the platform, the asset will be flipped over again to another buyer before finding a permanent home. Maybe never, right? There are many secondary buyouts that happen all the time. So it hasn't really been a limiting factor of M&A activity, and I'm sure it's a subject of thorough evaluation by the OEMs, and in the process of consolidating the supply chain and trusting a fewer number of supplier, like Vincent said, it's important to trust the people and trust the leadership of these outsourcing partners to continue to do their job. And I think ultimately it's about building long-term relationships, whether that's executed contractually and including long-term incentive to reducing cost and increasing quality. OEMs don't really care who is the owner. Obviously, the financial stability of the supplier is important, and I think that's part of the vetting process. But I would, it doesn't seem like a huge risk factor in the big scheme of things.
I started to touch on it just high level. If I can add a few points, it is that deeper, the second and third layer of the evaluation. It's not just what are they capable of and will they deliver. It's what I've actually done at Tom's and in prior organizations as well. As a part of these initial scoping activities, these business reviews, you're actually looking at, and it's okay from an OEM perspective to say, what have you done to invest in your organization in the last 5 to 10 years? How have you continuously improved your technology, your systems? What is your turnover rate? You start to get a better sense of how they operate, because I think your fear is because it would seem transactional. It's let's put in the 3 to 7 years, flip it, and move on to the next, and then from an OEM perspective, there's a lot of stop and start. So what I would encourage is looking in deeper dive into the history of how those CDMOs have been operating. How long have their leadership been entail, and how do they drive their organization? I think that'll give you a better sense of whether or not they, again, will be a partner going forward versus, just the next customer on the list.
Probably have time for one more question. Anyone? Comments? Thoughts? Hope he answered your question.
Well, I've got a question for the panel to wrap it up. So we've learned about what's happened, in 2020 and 2021, how COVID, really the CMDO acquisition has been thriving. What do you see in your crystal ball? What do you see over the next 6 months and into 2022? Is the boom going to continue, or is there going to be something else going on? And why don't we start at the far end with Chuck? His company's in the middle of the boom, closed a $20 million Series C venture capital round this morning. I bet you're hoping for boom times, Chuck.
Yeah, I am. I'm looking forward to the opportunities that lie ahead from that and what it creates. I'm going to keep it simple, just a crystal ball trend, probably just that, data is the high value currency, going forward. And, when we talk about patient data, we talk about customer data, how do we pull that data out, slice it, dice it, use it? How do we, how do we leverage that data? I know there's tools that, are on the dawning front here of AI and ML and all those, right? Pulling the information out of these registries or these places that have data so that we can work on creating better outcomes. And how do we pull this together to do that? That's just one thought I've been looking to into 2022 for.
And Vincent, what's your crystal ball? What do you see?
I think we're going to continue to see acquisitions. I think at a point it may even plateau. You're going to see suppliers that have comparable manufacturing capabilities, comparable services. This is where the X factor is going to start to come in of, okay, how between all of these that have very similar capabilities, what are those behavioral, what are those X factor capabilities and services that they bring from their leadership, their project team, that will add the most value to what they're providing to you. So it's going to be interesting to see the softer side of how these suppliers compare each other.
And Carlo?
As far as M&A activity to reach a plateau, I agree. There will be many secondary buyouts of mid to large size CDMO platforms owned by PEs that will transact, either bought out by corporate acquirers or merging or finding new financial sponsor, with the consequence that there will be a more consolidated top of the market with multiple players, of mid to large size, and then a plethora of smaller local manufacturers. So it will be. I think the trend is of going towards a two-speed industry, one of high quality, large, diversified, and international manufacturers, and then smaller specialized players who will, to some extent, have to fight for survival in this context, and it will be exciting to see what happens.
And I think from my perspective, I think we're going to see the consolidation continue, but eventually once the companies have the same capabilities, it's going to be about the innovation and technology. Which companies can really innovate and deliver the better product at the better price, and that's always what the big manufacturers are going to be looking for. So with that, please give a round of applause to the panelists today for sharing their knowledge. And thank you to Lori for organizing this.